the subject and the guest of speaker today, it's both are it is a extraordinary thing for us today, because we are going back to the 19th, 18th and 19th century, as well as bridging the 21st century by a renowned professor who is well versed in more than 4 Indian languages and 3-4 foreign languages. As all of us, we know that in 18th century, Ferdinand de Saussure, he has done only 55 years he lived, but during that period, an extraordinary work he has contributed to the field of linguistics, and especially general and structural linguistics. Till now, we are talking about the structural linguistics. Without the Ferdinand de Saussure, that will not be a final one. Actually, Ferdinand de Saussure was born in 1857, and he has done the doctoral research on Sanskrit. He was very particular about in the Indo-European languages during that time, research time, and later on his focus was on structural linguistics. That what he contributed, still we are talking about that language and parole, signifier and significant. All these things are still relevant, that what we call language and parole, that it is linguistic competence and performance now, so that it is relevant till today. Professor SUSHANT Kumar MISHRA, who has done excellent studies in his career, and as well as received so many laurels for him during his research, has accepted to participate in today's meeting, and he has very particular interest on language, literature, and semiotic studies. That Jawaharlal Nehru University is renowned for, after Professor Gill, I think SUSHANT Kumar MISHRA is there for continuous tradition. And as all of we know, that these semiotic studies started from signifier and signified. So today we are very happy to listen on this very interesting topic, that when the research started, linguistic research started in European, after that in American linguistics circle, that it is still stretch on to our Indian subcontinent. We cannot forget at this juncture that in Indian linguistics, Professor Khatri, Professor Pandit, Professor Sunit Kumar Chatterjee, and in southern side, T.P. Meenakshi Sundaram, all they contributed to the structural linguistics during 19th and 60s, that we are the 4th generation to continue the same. So today we are expecting Professor SUSHANT MISHRA to connect both the world, 19th century and 20th century, and we are very eager to listen to him. I give away, I don't want to waste, I don't want to take time, so I call upon Professor SUSHANT MISHRA to take this step. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Honorable Vice Chancellors present here, professors, honorable linguists. For me, it's a pleasure to have been invited for delivering this lecture. At the outset, I thank Professor Pillai, Professor Nagaraj Pillai, who discovered a little bit of Tamil in me and asked me if I may deliver the lecture, and then Professor Ramamurthy took it up further to present this challenge before me. And for me, it was really a challenge, whether I will be able to face the august audience here This will be a question, this was a question in my mind. However, I'm trying my best and I'm presenting some of my basic views. The selection of the topic itself was a challenge to me because my initial response was that perhaps I should think about some linguistic issues related to Tamil, but then I think I don't know much about it. And then at the same time, I felt that most of the people here would know more about it. But then at the second thought, I thought that all of you are linguists. And as linguists, we are proud of all the languages in the world. The entire linguistic heritage of humanity is ours. And for us to take care, to relish, to cherish, to study, to take forward the traditions of all the languages, because that is very important for us. And the moment I thought of this in contemporary times, my thought went back to SAUSSURE, who is often considered to be the father of structuralism, but at the same time, he is one of the first person with whom the contemporary understanding of linguistics started taking shape. Of course, language issues have always been there in the forefront of studies in various civilizations. Mainly two civilizations I have in mind right now. One is the Indian civilization, the other is the Greek civilization. And one common feature for both these Greek and Indian cultures has been that both of them have been pantheistic in their worldview. Now, this kind of pantheism, of course, would have led to some kind of commonality and some kind of questions that perhaps led to the Saussurean way of thinking. One important aspect of this is the representation through some or the other form of that God or that supreme nature or that supreme power, which cannot be really put into any visible or conceptualized form. And that led me to the books that SAUSSURE had written, and there I felt that I should share my thought, especially to my Tamil friends, because Tamil Nadu is one of the first places in India where French was taught. As you know very well, that even today, the Tamil-speaking areas, not to talk only of Tamil Nadu, but the Tamil-speaking areas have a strong tradition of French, a subject in which I have been trained for several years. There, my issue with SAUSSURE was that he was primarily a French, rather a Swiss French linguist. So the moment I say Swiss French, it means I'm talking of French beyond France. And when I interact with Tamils, I feel that here is also a tradition of French beyond France. And that's what unites these two lands, though they are far separated from each other. And with this thought in mind, I shared this information also of my lecture to several French professors across Tamil-speaking areas, so that my views may be further refined by their knowledge. And I would welcome also all the refinements in my views by all the eminent linguists and the eminent august audience present before me today. So, with a fright in mind, I now begin to talk about SAUSSURE, and there itself you can see the confusion right in the beginning. Is it visiting SAUSSURE or revisiting SAUSSURE? I hesitated. I had already given visiting as well as revisiting these two versions, because this really becomes an issue when I'm going to talk about it. However, finally today I have written visiting in the PPT. It is perhaps revisiting in some of the versions that you might have received earlier, and part of my lecture actually addresses this issue. Are we going to revisit or are we going simply to visit? As most of us know English and we have read SAUSSURE in English, whatever the British and the American traditions have presented from Saussure's writings. So, as I just now said, that often with Saussure we talk of the beginning of modern linguistics, not to belittle any other effort that prior to Saussure has been made. We all know how the earlier scholars, mainly in Kolkata, the British judge stationed in Kolkata and such others, they have talked about the Indo-European linguistics, and along with that, a lot of modern thoughts in linguistics start emerging. So that is often considered to be the beginning focal point of linguistic studies around the world. However, Saussure actually worked in the same tradition, and he was the first one to have talked about language synchronically, about language studies synchronically, and this was a new thought for the European mind at the time of Saussure when his book was published. In fact, in English, what we know as his book is often, we know that it was not written by him. And he was himself a well-trained historical linguist. So this dichotomy that a historical linguist, a philologist, has given the thought of static or synchronic study demands further investigations into the method and the publications by Saussure. As historical linguistics, we know that historical linguistics studies and take up the topics historically in two different ways, whether we go top to bottom or bottom to top. These are two approaches, and depending upon the kind of approach we take, we have to evolve our methodology. And Saussure has worked on both top to bottom, vertically, when the time comes from the historicity of language. Let's say, for example, the Old Greek to New Greek, the Old Latin to the Neo-Latin forms of Latin as well as of Neo-Latin languages, and Saussure has worked immensely on that. At the same time, at the time of Saussure, he did work the other way around also, because that was the moment where the issues in language, about the origins of the language and about the evolution of Indo-European family of languages, that were much debated upon, and it was in this context that Saussure worked. So he went both ways, as we say, in time scale, vertically. When we talk of horizontal scale, we know that that is synchronic linguistics. And here I am making the distinction between the diachronic and synchronic linguistics. That Saussure, who was well trained in diachronic linguistics, in other words, historical linguistics, and he used the diachrony to study the evolution of the language, as well as going back in the times to further find out the older forms and how the languages might take us, how the Indo-European languages might take us to one original language which could have been a kind of Proto-Indo-European language or pre-Indo-European language from where all the European languages would have emerged. During his lifetime, we find these publications as very important. Along with that, his publications also talk about specific grammatical issues in various languages. Of course, in some of the publications, he has talked about the phonological and morphological features of various Indo-European usages in language. We have mostly talked about it in the English fraternity, because in English, his study on the vowel system of Indo-European languages is very well known. It is one of his works translated into English. So let's look at his publications, some of his publications, before I venture into this issue further. This is the first book, which was published in 1916, in the beginning of 20th century, posthumously, about which the introducer today also talked about. I have put the French title. We all know this book, A Course in General Linguistics. It has been translated in English, and it is one of the major influences in the evolution of structuralism, because the methodological ideas presented in this book was used by various other scholars later on across Europe, from Russian formalists to French structuralists to German thinkers and to other American thinkers also in post-Second World War scenario. So from 1916 onwards, yes sir.
Sorry, PPT is not moving.
I have gone to the second slide. It is before me. Is it not moving for you?
No.
See this. Now is it?
No, sir. You please carry on. It's not moving, some problem. But if you can carry on.
Okay. So is it fine or should I do something? Because it is important that it moves for my audience, some of the pictures which are there. Is it not moving at all?
Please, you can use the arrow button, sir. Arrow button.
Yes, I'm using arrow button. I'm moving from arrow itself.
But first slide only.
Okay. Dr. Kamachi, I think you have used a share button, I think. PPT share
already
button.
shared it. Shared, sir, already shared.
Okay.
But
Okay.
his PPT is not moving.
I'll find out. I'll find out.
Okay.
Okay.
Please continue, sir.
Yes, sir. Okay. So this is the first book, Course in General Linguistics. A very important point about this book, which is often I have seen being missed in the English-speaking fraternity as we do in India and some other linguists with whom I have interacted from abroad. We often say that this book was written by his students. Now here, I'm not sure if my PPT is visible, but as you all know, this book was actually prepared and edited by two eminent thinkers or two eminent linguists. One is Charles Bailly, in French we pronounce as Bailly, and the other was Albert Sechet. Now, Charles Bailly, Albert Sechet, about them, they are not taken seriously the moment you present them as the students of SAUSSURE. However, you can check with various sites, if you have these two names, that both of them were eminent linguists themselves. And in fact, the first name I had just now mentioned, Charles Bailly, was not at all a student, but only 2-3 years younger, a few years younger to SAUSSURE, and he was the one who succeeded the chair of SAUSSURE just after SAUSSURE. So his contribution is very important, not only in the form of editing of this book, but also he has himself written independently lots of books, and especially in the field of stylistics. You go to any European university, right from formalist schools to other structurists, to several forms of structurist schools and Prague school and others, they all have been influenced by the studies of Charles Bailly in terms of stylistics. And the categories that he has evolved for studying stylistics and some other fields in linguistics, they remain very important, and they are the ones which remain in the core of several stylistic studies or several studies in the field of stylistics. Often the American linguists and British linguists have also referred to them, but unfortunately the book is again not available in English. The book is, so far as I know, it is available mostly in 3 languages only, French, German and Russian. So maybe other European languages also it is available, but for sure in English his books have not yet been translated, and that is one of the reasons why we are not aware of the importance of the works of Charles Bailly, who has tremendously contributed in the field of stylistics and lexicography. Often he is also studied there. Yes, Albert Sechet, the second one, was a research scholar at that point of time when SAUSSURE died. So Charles Bailly, an eminent linguist on his own, and along with a young scholar at that point of time, worked on the ideas that SAUSSURE was working, and then they edited. Now, why I am talking about this is that we cannot reduce the intervention of these two linguists. One of them already established linguist, and the other one was already trained in linguistics till that point of time, both of them well trained in the methods of historical linguistics and already working in connection, in relation with SAUSSURE, already working on the ideas on which SAUSSURE was working, because that point of time, the late 19th century and early 20th century, the entire French-speaking world was undergoing a certain kind of literary, philosophical or linguistic movement in which a lot of influences from Indian thinkers, and I say Indian thinkers of all trends and all places in India, their ideas were playing a lot of important role. This is visible in several other fields also, in literature, literary studies also. However, I will not go into that. My point here is that the importance of Charles Bailey and his intervention is very crucial in understanding this text, Course in General Linguistics, which was a text not published during the lifetime of SAUSSURE, but was published on the basis of the interaction of these two good scholars of linguistics with SAUSSURE, plus whatever class notes, etc., whatever personal notes, etc., SAUSSURE had shared with them, or he had shared with others during his lifetime. Now, look at the publication that happened during the lifetime of SAUSSURE. That's the second one. That's why I am putting the first publication in this slide, and I am putting the last publication on SAUSSURE, which goes often by the name of Saussurean ideas presented in the book. So that is the Course in General Linguistics. But the second book, again, it in form of one of the articles, it is published in English. This is about the primitive system of vowels in the Indo-European languages. But as it appears in English, it is only a long essay, but not a full book of about 400 pages or so, in which SAUSSURE actually discusses the methodology that he has used using several Indo-European languages, including the languages of Slavic groups, including the languages of Indo-Germanic groups, and other groups coming within Indo-European languages. Now, this becomes very important in understanding the text and the methodology of SAUSSURE, because this is where SAUSSURE is trying to figure out the original language also, though he has not worked very well in this text itself, but he has been continuously working on the methodology, which in later life he did work and he did evolve, and at the end of the day, towards the end of his life, it is often said, of course there is no proof of that SAUSSURE had gone mad looking after or looking for the original Indo-European verbs, the verbal system from where the entire Indo-European system of verbs could have been evolved. However, this approach did not yield much result, but in this publication in 1878, which happened during his lifetime, we do see the effort of comparing and contrasting the languages in terms of its data, in terms of stylistic features, etc., from where Charles Bailey had also shared his clues and has also worked upon further in his work, all the time remaining almost a few years younger colleague of SAUSSURE. So this publication is very important, and often this publication is missed out by us, the English world linguists, because till date it has not been translated into English, though it is available on internet in its original form in French. This is a huge book which only summarized as part of one vocalic system in Greek, in ancient Greek or in Old Greek. Only that aspect is available in English, but the comparative study of various families within Indo-European family has been undertaken in this text, which is missing. And that's where I wanted to revisit, because this is the time in 21st century that we should go beyond the way SAUSSURE is presented by the English and the American scholars they may know, some of them may know the European languages, but they have not presented this, his text is still in English. And hence our linguists, they have not been able to work in the entire methodological systems presented by SAUSSURE. Rather, we have been recipient of whatever has trickled down through some English translations of that book, which was presented by two other eminent linguists posthumously on the name of SAUSSURE. And that is only a part of his ideas, because even in the publication of 1878, the Saussurean thinking on the methods of historical linguistics remained very important, and that too, since he was comparing on the basis of the existing forms in various Indo-European languages, as I mentioned, Russian and other Slavic languages, Germanic languages, Neo-Latin languages, and Indian languages. He was using a kind of synchronic method for understanding and reconstructing the pre-Indo-European or some possible forms of old Indo-European language. So this was a very important approach, where SAUSSURE was actually working with the methodology which was later used for synchronic linguistics, all the while talking about and addressing the questions related to historical linguistics. And this part is missing till date. Entire 20th century, I don't find even a proper reference to this methodology of SAUSSURE in the English-speaking world. Yes. Now, the next publication is very important, as Professor introduced today, that SAUSSURE had worked on Sanskrit. On what basis do we say that he had worked on Sanskrit? Of course, we have some references, and since he was talking about Indo-European linguistics, he did know some of the Indian languages, and during his time, as I have mentioned earlier, that he was present in an era in French world or entire European world where Indian thinkers were playing an important role. There were poets, for example, one of the poets who used to call himself John Lahore. Why Lahore? Because Lahore was an important intellectual center those days, and hence this person nicknamed himself John Lahore, and there are various others at that point of time. This you will find in various literary texts, reference various philosophical texts right from the times of almost 1850s or little earlier also. So, and there are other movements which are known as end century movements, fin siècle movements in France and French speaking world. So he was working at that point
Looks like there's no audio.
Hello.
Yeah, like Professor Uma, there is no audio.
Hello.
Hello,
There's
no audio from the speaker.
disconnected.
Hello.
Audio,
No
audio
audio from the
disconnected.
speaker.
Mishra sir.
I think he has some network issue.
Mishra sir. Please unmute your audio, sir. Mishra sir?
Sir, his video is frozen, so please check check with him whether his network is an issue.
You can talk to over phone.
Yeah, over phone, sir. That's good.
Ramurthy? Ramurthy?
Contact பண்ண.
Okay.
Voice is not yet to reach.
சார் இது ராமர் சாருக்கு ஃபோன் பண்ணி பாருங்க சார்.
அவர் கான்டாக்ட் பண்ணிட்டு இருக்காரு.
சரி.
Linguistic features where they could have studied historically or synchronically these two languages in terms of linguistics, something that SAUSSURE is doing. SAUSSURE is invoking the categories of traditional grammar, but as I have already said, that he used those traditional grammatical categories using the methodology of doing a synchronic study. Now, this is a very important feature which is available right in his PhD thesis, and it has a tradition, of course. There are other thinkers who have done it before SAUSSURE, but those texts are again not available into English, unfortunately. Fortunately, for the first time, at least a semblance of translation of this 2018 text has come into English of the PhD thesis of SAUSSURE. And I believe, again, this is my belief to be substantiated further by the translator himself, that since the translator was a philosophy professor, so he might have concentrated more on the philosophical aspects of the linguistic studies of SAUSSURE and its structuralist implications, and not so much about the exact linguistic categories that have been used. This is always a possibility because such changes happen, and there are various studies in terms of comparative translation styles. This happens in various fields. In fact, when the second sex of Simone de Beauvoir was translated into English, it was not by a feminist, it was not by a thinker from that field, but by someone who did not belong to even social sciences. So what he did present the ideas in English, but he could not actually capture a lot of ideas from Simone de Beauvoir, and consequently the 67 women thinkers referred to by Simone de Beauvoir have been omitted in the first English translation. So what you feel that Simone de Beauvoir exists in vacuum, when you read the English translation of SAUSSURE, you again feel as if he existed in a vacuum and he was the first thinker who could actually suddenly come up with these categories, but it is not so. I have shown you one of the references here which is taken up in English, Mr. Stensler, and there are other thinkers, but prior to him also people did not write in French, they wrote in Latin, because Latin was, like we write mostly in English. The thesis in most of the central universities and institutions of eminence in Europe, the 18th and 19th century, a lot of theses were written in Latin. So in Latin, we do find such PhD theses which are again not available to us. So SAUSSURE does not happen in vacuum. That's the point I'm trying to make here. Now, when we look at the translated version of this, as I have already mentioned, we find that there are theoretical conceptualizations of the original which are lost. This is what I am trying to say, and that's where we need to visit, or rather revisit, SAUSSURE, because the way SAUSSURE has been presented only as a fragment of Apohavad thinkers of Buddhism is intriguing, because his methodology is more important for us. That methodology which uses historical linguistics and both diachronic and synchronic linguistics, both static and dynamic linguistics, in such a way that they come at a cross section and they feed on each other. If we miss that theory, unfortunately, we are not able to use some of the traditional categories for contemporary studies, and vice versa also. And unfortunately, in this scenario, of course, we talk about language universal and such other great thoughts which are very important to modern linguistics, and rightly so, and they have their own contributions, but the historical linguistics is lost in that process. So in English, for 100 years, we have come to a stage till 21st century that some of the categories in some of the branches of linguistics, they become static. For example, stylistics. For example, a study of the methodology of Indo-European linguistics, because as we know, Indo-European linguistics is not only about the languages, about the language families within Indo-European large language family, but it is about the methodology which evolved in understanding this kind of methodological approach to classify the languages. So the questions on methodology, which was abundantly addressed in studying Indo-European linguistics, the same methodology can be implemented to other language studies also. Unfortunately, this has not been so, and that methodology itself, which gave rise to structuralist thinking, has been relegated into the background, and we need to revisit and re-understand, because we have to understand that it is that methodology which has given linguistics in the forefront of entire 20th century, which has been primarily in various fields of knowledge, the core concept of thought for classifying the knowledge systems that we evolved. And this methodology we need to visit, we need to revisit further for doing comparative and contrastive linguistics. Not only that, for other categories of comparative and contrastive studies in other fields as well. Even in the typology of language and several other notions, as I have mentioned, in language studies come from that methodology, and that methodology need to be further used with the linguistic data that is available to us in some other contexts. I'm yet to see some of the Japanese thinkers working on it. Osaka University has a brilliant department, but that methodology is missing from there. Again, perhaps because such texts which actually gave the methodology, the Saussurean methodology, are missing, and that tradition is missing. So we need to visit that methodological approach. And one of the texts, though some thinkers have been doing it, several European thinkers have been working on it also, and one of the texts, you can find the text itself. I have placed again the Amazon version of that text in my PPT. If it is shared, you can see the rise and fall of languages. Some of you might have read these texts, but unfortunately I don't find this text in most of the linguistic departments being taught in India. And this is a text by R.M.W. Dixon, published in 1977. So this text is missing, and this is one of the approaches which further refines the approaches that were used earlier by Saussure and his contemporaries, and little later also by those who worked in the same area. Charles Bali as one of the thinkers, as I have already mentioned, who has himself contributed a lot in the field of stylistics and lexicography. So this is one text which we need to study in our times, because it does give us a methodological approach which goes beyond the studies of Indo-European linguistics using the similar methodology, because in this book he has studied the texts, texts, or rather the language data, not text, but the language data from other parts near Australia, and has used and has evolved his understanding further in historical linguistics, yet the methodological approach remain relevant for studying the static linguistic models also. And here we have the typologically different family groups of languages, and the coexistence of these two methodological approaches doing historical linguistics as well as the synchronic linguistics, they remain very important. And in this context, we have a few questions that we come across in the Indian multilingual spaces. Why this approach is very important for us, which is unfortunately perhaps missing so far as I know from our studies in linguistics, that this kind of coexistence of approaches we notice in Indian linguistic traditions, in various traditions of linguistics that we have in India. For example, in Tamil itself, when we talk of Tolkapiyam, it relates to, Tolkapiyam itself relates to the Andhra tradition of Sanskrit grammarians. Now, what is this Andhra tradition of Sanskrit grammarians? There are other thinkers also who talk about it in other language schools of India. So this kind of coexistence of methodological approaches has existed, and if we study the linguistic approaches that Saussure has taken and the kind of debate Saussure has taken, which directly come from such texts, as I have already shown, unfortunately the PPT could not be shared, but this approach needs to be further visited and evolved by our people. And with this, I think I should stop here, because now I should simply say Nunnery Unkal. I don't know, Nunnery is sufficient. This also I have tried to learn a little bit Tamil, and from there I say at least Nunnery, thank you for your kind attention. Hello.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir. I am Pramod Swami speaking. Thank you for your nice presentation about our Ferdinand de Saussure. Basically, historical linguist, but worked on synchronic studies. And yeah, as you pointed out in your lecture, that in between the languages belonging to the same family, comparative and contrastive features should be studied at this context based on the work they have done and the role which they have shown to us that you mentioned in your lecture. Now the respected professors are here, scholars are here, and I think now it will be open for discussion now, and I will invite the professors to ask the questions. Just I'll go through the chats if any questions are there. Otherwise, we will call Professor Karnakaran to give his suggestion. Sir?
Thank you for inviting me for giving suggestions. I am really very happy that Professor Mishra has given us a good account of Saussure's contributions as a historical linguist and also as a structural linguist. You know, during those days, I understand that when any study is made with reference to language, you know, it is more philosophical approach was also there in many studies, but Tolkapiyam in Tamil is an exception. You know, you were mentioning something about phonetics. You know, Tolkapiyam's grammar begins with phonetics. I think it was the only traditional grammar written 2000 or 3000 years back with clear cut definitions and also explanations, various phonetic, even phonological features. It differentiates both phone and phonemes by some of the terms which he suffixes, which he adds, like karam, karam, kan, and so on. So this is one of the important aspects which we don't find in modern, some of the historical grammars about as references. That is more important. That is one thing. And another thing is Saussure's contributions really helped the comparative and contrast historical linguists to come forward to take up studies related to different branches of structural linguistics, levels of structural linguistics. And so we should appreciate Saussurean contributions, though you find it more historical way of approaches, but still it has given ample space for structuralism, a particular reference to different branches. So I am sure, it is a high time that we should visit scholars like Saussure, which should be revisited and explained further for more discussions. And I am sure your lecture will give ample scope for further discussions in the field of structural linguistics. Historical grammars, historical studies are very important for any structural studies. You have to depend upon that kind of material also. You cannot throw away the history of a particular language and do the structural linguistic studies. Maybe it is possible an unwritten language or a language spoken by the tribes or at distant remote places, living in distant remote places. So it is very important to give you ample that historical linguistics provides ample evidences for making structural studies. I think your lecture has thrown light on this area. We are really very happy that you have given your lecture so that people interested in historical and comparative studies will come forward to look into those materials also while finalizing their descriptive or structural linguistic studies. What are the changes that are found in modern descriptions and explanations given? Thank you very much, Professor Mishra. We are really very happy, and it will create new avenues for further research in structural linguistics as well as in other areas. Thank you very much.
Professor Rajeshwaran, sir.
Yes, I'm Rajeshwaran from Annamalai University. So I have been listening to your lecture. It was really thought-provoking one. Since you are in JNU, now I have a question with you. Most of our linguistics department in India, in the curriculum, the subject historical linguistics is missing.
Yes, sir.
And from your talk, I understand that it is most important thing to know more about Saussure. But what is now your opinion about the missing element in our curricula in most of our universities?
No, as I have said, sir, that's why I mentioned the text of 2018 as translated work from Saussure, and also, as I mentioned, the text which unfortunately I'm not able to show, but you can find this Rise and Fall of Languages, which talks about, again, a new methodology published in 1977. So since the subject historical linguistics is missing from our curriculum. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why we are not able to develop the new categories also in studying various branches of linguistics. And sometimes I have asked the professors teaching stylistics also, teaching translation studies also, that from where you get the categories that you use, especially in comparative stylistics and doing stylistics, not in terms of literary features, but in terms of linguistic features, from where do you get the categories? And they often do not have any clue about it. And all this emanate from the fact that we have not sufficiently visited the tradition of SAUSSURE, not in terms of studies on SAUSSURE, but the tradition of the chairs that worked, on which SAUSSURE himself worked. Charles Bali was his eminent successor, and later on also the other person, Albert Sachet, who had worked on the same book on the publication of SAUSSURE, he also worked in that field, his wife also worked in that field, and several other thinkers. Unfortunately, that part is missing. And even if we try to understand historical linguistics, like JNU, there is a course on historical linguistics taught mostly by those who are not trained in that field after the unfortunate demise of Professor KUMAR. Unfortunately, I have had the opportunity to learn from him, Professor KUMAR of Delhi University, who knew Latin and Greek, and he's taught this subject with some original insights. After him, the people are groping in dark to start this subject, and sometimes they take up to teach this subject, but the methodological approach is mostly missing. One or two texts are referred to, but they are not sufficient, because those texts do not talk of the methodological approaches. We have to begin with at least 2-3 thinkers which are very well known, and coming at least one of the texts which is available in English, but the tradition has to be understood. And unfortunately, since we don't understand that tradition, somewhere our growth in the study of static linguistics also remains stunted. We mostly depend upon some of the thinkers of American and Australian scholarship, whose contributions remain very important. But if you take texts like the text of Halliday and Ruqayya Hassan, the ways of seeing and the ways of meaning, and such other texts, again you fall back upon the same methodology. So the methodological approaches is often missing in categorizing, and this emanates from the unfortunate fact that most of us in our generation, we are not trained in historical linguistics, and that is missing from our curriculum. We need to further work on it, and perhaps one of the former directors of CIL, I had heard him in one of the lectures, and even the founder director of CIL, I had heard him also. Both of them talked about the comparative philological studies between Indian languages. Unfortunately, that also doesn't exist, and one of the reasons of this is that we do not have sufficiently developed departments. Perhaps this is a very important reason, that we do not have proper departments, or our linguistics departments do not address some of the aspects of historical linguistics. So this is the outcome, and we are not able to establish proper and good dialogue between Indian languages, at least among the linguists. And then there are political outcomes of this. In the last slide, I had tried to hint at this point. For example, there are language isolates in Europe. The moment I have talked about it, though I did not talk about it in the lecture because it was not available to all of you, but these language isolates in Europe, they become somewhere cultural isolates. And as you know, in the nation state theory, the political outcome of being a language isolate, thus being a cultural isolate, then the political outcome can be sometimes drastic. And we have faced such issues. Fortunately, in India, we have not faced till date such issues, but we are still waiting a linguistic response or linguists' response to such issues. And I believe in 21st century, this is high time that as linguists, we must try to address such issues in a multilingual society like ours. Thank you, sir. These are my views.
Professor Ravi Shankar?
Oh.
Yes. Something.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking I share the same view of Professor Nair, because in the modern linguistics, in the modern time, why SAUSSURE has lost its significance. Any suggestion can you see? Any reason can you give, sir?
Sir, most of the times, as I see in contemporary times, the thinkers, they have not concentrated on the methodological approaches. And that is one of the reasons why SAUSSURE and such thinkers, they lost relevance. The methodology need to evolve. As I mentioned in my lecture also, that the linguistics has been in the forefront of all the 20th century studies. We have linguisticians, some of the words as used by eminent linguists in India itself, like Prabal Das Gupta, he used to use this word linguisticians, like scientists of language, and they are very important because entire 20th century we have been talking about methodology. Now the moment we talk about something like beyond methodology and is still not able to evolve actually a methodology to go beyond methodology, perhaps this is where we have to readdress the question of methodology, and unless we reassess our approaches of studying languages the way we do, we will be working in vacuum. Historically means only last 100 years, we see that language studies has provided the methodology. Since we are no more talking about methodology, I gave examples from stylistics and such other translation studies features. Like you see, many of the applied linguistic subjects, they do not have proper methodology. Now, in this scenario, we have to start assessing the methodological approaches to develop a comprehensive language understanding, which will further get translated into several other aspects like political one. I have already mentioned one, and there are other one. You can see the new education policy, they also fall short of somewhere in our education system. We have to address the issues of language, and all that has to be done by methodologically, and only language sciences can provide that methodology. At least for last 100 years, whatever we have seen, that the language scientists have been at the forefront. So this is the reason, since we don't talk about methodology, this is perhaps one of the reasons why SAUSSURE and such thinkers have lost their relevance. If we start thinking about methodology, in English world we have taken, I mentioned, sir, the thoughts have come mostly from very eminent and important thinkers from the US, Australia, and such others. I mentioned a few, there are others also. So, but they have developed their methodology in a certain context. The same context may not be applicable to us, and we have to evolve our methodological approaches. And here are the thinkers, especially SAUSSURE, who has worked on it. But unfortunately, that aspect of SAUSSURE is not available to us in English. That was the focal point about which I am talking. So we need to address actually the texts. And even in translation, that's what I said, the methodological approach is missing. So though a philosophy professor has worked on it, but unfortunately, as we see in India, the Vyakaran, the grammarians, they have worked as a philosophical system. That means in philosophical, that means there is a particular methodological approach, because philosophical systems, the moment we study, there is a particular methodological approach, and that we see across traditions from Hemchandracharya to Tolkappiyam to Panini and the successors of Panini like Patanjali, etc. So that methodological approach we have to evolve, and this is where exactly. That's my point.
Exactly.
Yes.
Sir, Perumal sir. Perumal Sangam, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I am Kamachi speaking, sir.
Yes.
There is one doubt. It is wonderful, sir, in terms of historical text. I think Panini doesn't mention about the genitive case, but genitive case is existing in Sanskrit. I want to know who is the first person or first grammarian who mentioned about the genitive case, sir, in Sanskrit, because we have genitive case in Tolkappiyam.
No, Panini mentions, sir, Panini mentions genitive cases.
Doesn't mention.
Yeah, Panini mentions.
Panini doesn't mention about. I see.
No, he mentions.
No, Panini doesn't mention about, I see. Somebody
Sir,
says
Panini,
doesn't mention about the genitive case. I see. Okay.
he mentions the Shashti Vibhakti. Actually, in Paninian system, the moment he starts distinguishing between Vibhakti and Karak, he talks about Shashti Vibhakti, and that becomes a case for Sambandha. So he does talk about it, and the entire tradition refers to Panini also for this. But it is difficult for me to mention from where it begins, because Panini himself has taken a lot from various pre-Paninian grammarians. At least 10 are mentioned there. There are others. There may be others also, because Panini does not happen again in vacuum. He comes in a tradition. But those texts are unfortunately lost, most probably for us. But in tradition it exists. So Panini, when he talks about Shashti Vibhakti, in that context he does mention, and that's that one of his sutras, as I mentioned in my lecture also, has been referred to by SAUSSURE also. That sutra is Shashti Chanadare, and it is exactly on one of the important usages of genitive case.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Rajendran, sir.
Hello, am I audible to you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Yeah, so it's actually I am really fascinated by the talk, especially SAUSSURE is the one who rather channelized to the structural linguistics, and of course we have been taken away by Chomsky, who was proposing for generative grammar. Professor, would you please enlighten me how this travel happened, Saussurean thought to the generative thought?
Sorry, it's a big question you are asking me, sir. From Saussure to Chomsky.
ये तो बहुत मुश्किल है सब आपको जवाब देना.
It is a big journey, very difficult to trace in one lecture, I believe, perhaps one semester. However, to put it in a very simple manner, see, as I said, Saussure comes in a tradition. I have already talked about it. Similarly, Chomsky, also being a student of Bertrand Russell, comes in a tradition, and being a junior colleague almost of Wittgenstein, he shares that tradition of the British and the Europeans, where the debates on language, its origin, and the usages of variations in languages have been studied. And these usages and his ideas refer, again, you will notice most of us know that you talk about innate theory and such other theories that he talks about, go back to the debate of Plato, Aristotle, and such ancient Greek thinkers. And in the beginning of my lecture today, I have hinted at that aspect in the form of pantheism, because Chomsky also happens in a pantheistic thinking system, where the Christian thinking system of uniformity has been challenged. And this is a very important European debate, I would say since 16th century onwards, but in language sciences it happens in 18th century, and later in linguistics that becomes a very important debate. And that's where Chomsky happens, when he tries to find out syntactically the universal categories, all the time accepting the diversities of languages. Now this is where Saussure to Chomsky, and that journey becomes fascinating, because you see, I have mentioned that Saussure also talks about Indo-European linguistics, which is actually about the methodology, not about the family tree of languages which come in the Indo-European languages, but more about the methodology. And similarly, Chomsky also further works on that methodology and comes up with interesting results. Of course, with the intervention of his training in various sciences, mathematics, etc., he brings fresh and new insights. And being a mathematician, he depends upon the innate theory much more than Saussure, who depends more upon the arbitrariness of language and on the tradition of language, as we study in Long and Parole also. So I must elaborate that, because mathematics is often considered to be a very rational subject, and when we see innate theory and all that, they appear to be irrational. But you see, this is a point where rationality becomes a kind of unexplainable rationality. Otherwise, how do you talk about language system itself? The historical linguist would say that the counting goes by 4 fingers. So we have a system of 4 in counting, or we have system of dozen in counting. We have system of 10 in counting. So 4 or 5 or 10, they become the multiples only because we have 4 fingers, as I can see 4. Some counting, Celtics had 4 counting systems. Then we have some other counting systems which come from 5. So we have words as the core words of languages as 5, etc. But this notion itself of number system as a rational system is a very innate system, and there is no reason where we can find 1 or 2 as existing in nature. The number system is one of the proofs of the innateness of our rational thinking. In philosophy, they debate a lot about it. So it is the same methodological approach and the same tradition from Saussure to Chomsky, where we find different results due to interventions and different logical thinkings. But interestingly, both of them go back to the same pre-Christian pantheistic thinking, where the Europeans considered themselves the inheritors of the Greeks and the pre-Christian Latin thinkers. They rejected that kind of rationality which had evolved in the Christian Europe and considered them to be medieval dark Europe, which is not so. I disagree with that terminology, but that is a different debate. However, the methodological approaches of pre-Christian Europe actually, as I mentioned earlier, came very close to the methodological approaches of Indian thinkers, both of them being pantheistic, both of them accepting diversity while trying to find the unity and the universality. That's where in philosophical debates also we find the Nirakar as well as Sakar, the Sagun as well as Nirgun. Both these categories, they exist philosophically, they exist in the daily life and rituals. Also, you can find several deities. Even Tamil Nadu, when I travel from one area to the other area, I feel that people are getting attached to various forms of deities, while all the time depending upon the God Almighty, which has no form. And this kind of situation existed for Chomskyan thought process also, and for Saussurean thought process also. So both of them somewhere get related, and then that journey which you are talking about, I have mentioned Russell, I have mentioned a few thinkers like who talk about naming theory of meaning, as we study in philosophy of language, naming theory of meaning by Russell, and the use theory of meaning by Wittgenstein. And Saussure is concerned about the use theory of meaning because that is later. Wittgenstein actually contradicts, not further builds upon the Russellian theory, and a lot of such theorists, they come in that tradition. So somewhere that debate is very fascinating, about which you have mentioned, sir, but it is too large a question that I can discuss. I can hint at some of the thinkers through which we have to understand the processes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Really
Professor
Rangan, sir.
Hello.
Yes,
sir. You can, if any question, if you want to ask Professor SUSHANT MISHRA, you can, sir.
Is it audible?
Yes,
sir, audible.
Okay. There is the lecture was very interesting, and it was nicely put the Saussurean ideas. There is one doubt I have in my mind. At least when I examine the Tamil grammatical tradition, there is no historical grammar. That is, you have a kind of grammar describing the language in different periods, but there is no comparison, or there is no historical evolution. That type of grammar is absent. In a way, whether there was no sense of history in terms of the language development or whatever it may be. I do not know about the Sanskrit tradition. If you have a kind of parallel things in there also, why this kind of situation in our grammatical tradition? There is no historical things.
Yes, sir. Very interesting question, a very important issue that we have to address. Actually, sir, what you say is absolutely correct. And in fact, the Western mind gets to know about the synchronic approaches while studying the Indian grammarians. There were various thinkers who studied Indian grammarians of various types. I won't say only Sanskrit, but there are other Prakrit grammarians. I have mentioned about them, some of them, Tolka PM and Tamil grammarians being very important. In fact, in Tamil itself, as you know, that there have been lexicographers, there have been lexicographical works in Tamil which have talked about the alphabetical Tamil dictionaries. So, and Tamil is very important, Tamil tradition is very important in that. And there are other traditions also. Gujaratis, I mentioned one, Hemchandrachar, Prakrit grammarians and others. And there is less historical approach. Perhaps, again, this is a conjecture, I'm not sure of that. Perhaps because we had a notion of a certain kind of language at one point of time being written. So any scholar who has studied that particular language of his time actually described the features of that language of his time. Historically, why they did not study the evolution of it, I am not sure. However, I would go back to one aspect of Indian linguistic tradition, that is pre-Paninian. The text is, it is a Sanskrit grammarian, I am forgetting the name, the one who talks about first the etymological approaches to understand, and his purpose, it is just prior to Mimamsa Sutra, and I'm just forgetting the name. He's a few centuries prior to Sanskrit grammarian Panini, and he talks about in his book about the changes in the Vedic systems and why people are not able to understand the Vedic texts. So in that text, he does talk about the evolution of the texts and the words and the language systems used in the text. But you are correct, sir, that after that we don't find, and same is true for European tradition also. It is only past 17th century when they started discovering India, when they found out the incidental similarities between Latin, Greek and Sanskrit, that they got interested in such philological studies which gave rise to historical study. Prior to that, I don't think anywhere in any tradition anybody has talked about the evolution of a language. Perhaps it was a fact taken for granted, where intellectually earlier forms of languages were also used, like in India also we find in Tamil also. It is possible to find let's say a 12th century grammarian or the 13th century, 14th century grammarian talking about 5th or 6th century texts, Tamil Sangam texts, using those texts to explain the grammatical categories. And they always thought that it is the language, because those forms did exist in various ways in the contemporary times also. And even today, those poets, etc., they are sung and people understand them. So somewhere the language existed in a lived cultural form. So they studied the contemporary language, and through that they understood the historical texts also. For them, the study of historicity of an evolution of a text was not that important. Perhaps because it was not related to identity politics, and the whole notion of history gets related even in Europe to the identity politics, and until and unless the issue of a national language which comes, there is a historical period for it in Spain and France for the first time. There are edicts given by kings of France for particular reasons. So until and unless that happens with the evolution of nation states under monarchic systems, that kind of historicity was not important, because language was meant to communicate primarily. So they tried to study the communication processes more, and the integral factors within the language related to the communication processes. This is my understanding to your question. So historicity was not that important because it was not related to identity. People would learn each other's language and they would gradually understand. Those days they would travel from one area to the other area. So from Kanyakumari, if the other version of Tamil, the other some delegations, if you find between them, we can easily travel to the other area. So in lieu of understanding dialectal variation,
Not audible.
I think the audio is cut. I think.
Audio.
Yes,
Audio,
yes,
sir.
sir.
I'm not able to hear.
Yeah, audio is missing, sir.
Oh.
Let him come back 1 minute.
Okay, then it's all right. Go ahead.
Sir?
Hello?
Is some problem in his audio.
Okay, okay,
Okay. Now we
okay.
can go to vote of thanks, sir.
அடுத்தது போங்க. Okay.
Okay.
Sir, shall I start, sir?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay.
Before that, just check the Professor Mishra ji is there. When you say some vote of
Yeah,
thanks.
he is there, sir. He is.
Audio is, I think,
Yeah.
audio is missing. Audio and video.
He's inside the room. He's seen in the participant list.
Just wait, Lalita, just wait, I will connect him.
We have to wait, sir. Shall we wait for some minute?
Wait for a minute, Lalita.
Sure,
Madam,
sir. Sure,
1 minute.
sure,
Huh?
sure.
Otherwise, it doesn't look nice.
Yeah,
Saying
sure,
vote
sir.
of thanks in his absence.
Yeah. Let him on. Oh, yes. 1 minute.
To you. Huh? Okay. So, Lalita, you can go ahead with the vote of thanks, and I am putting my phone. Vote.
Oh. So, shall I start, sir, now?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir. So, good evening, all. Honorable President, respected Secretary and Treasurer of Tamil Mozhiyiyal Sangam, valued executive members of Tamil Mozhiyiyal Sangam, and our most treasured participants. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks for this 17th e-lecture of our weekly e-lecture series that has been organized by Tamil Mozhiyiyal Sangam. I, on behalf of Tamil Mozhiyiyal Sangam and its entire team of Tamil Mozhiyiyal Sangam, let me call it as a fraternity of Tamil linguistics here, we're all together, and on my own behalf, I extend a very hearty vote of thanks to the speaker, Professor SUSHANT MISHRA, Professor, Center for French and Francophone Studies, School of Language, Literature and Cultural Studies, JAWAHRLAL Nehru University, Delhi, for feasting us with your important learnedness and sharing with us your findings and opinions today, sir. Dear Professor, with your today's topic, visiting SAUSSURE in 21st century India, you have made us to travel back to the Victorian era by starting to describe about his book where SAUSSUREan thoughts been come into light in 1916 with his publication by his students, Ballet and Shashay. We were enlightened to hear his work on the absolutive genitive case in Sanskrit, which has been his part of his PhD thesis. Your lecture offered a light on comparative philology by elaborating the works of SAUSSURE. And we are very happy to see his availability of his PhD thesis in English, published during 2018, which you have highlighted as splendid, sir. And the SAUSSUREan methodology has been very vividly focused by you, sir. Thank you for your commendable lecture on Saussurean work, sir. Sir, as you said, this is a right time and a high time to dwell into these aspects of methodological approaches to language sciences. Thank you. Thanks a lot for your suggestion, sir. And I'm grateful to Dr. V. Perumal Swami, Professor cum Deputy Director, Central Institute of Indian Languages, Manasagangotri, Mysore, for presiding over this session and today's lecture. Thank you, sir. And I'm thankful to Professor Karnagaran, President of Tamil Mozhiyiyal Sangam, Professor G. Balasubramaniam, Secretary Tamil Mozhiyiyal Sangam, for organizing such a knowledgeable lecture. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your immense work, what you are doing for Tamil Mozhiyiyal Sangam. I also thank Professor Ramamurthy for giving me this opportunity to be with you all today. And my thanks are all to all the members of Tamil Mozhiyiyal Sangam. My special thanks are due to Dr. Kamachi for his academic and technical support for organizing the series of lectures. I'm also indebted to all the esteemed scholars presented here and who all engage with the knowledgeable discussions and enlightened us more in this topic. Thank you, sir. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you for giving a nice vote of thanks for all of us. And I think we are going to end this program with the